Let's bring in epidemiologist Devra Davis. Dr. Davis advises governments and policymakers, and she also has an extensive experience working with organizations like the WHO, the UN, and the IMF. Dr. Davis, welcome to the show. I want to talk about the global vaccination efforts in a second, but first, within China itself, talk a little bit about the vaccine options there and also the overall rollout process in the country. How is priority determined? What's the timeline for getting the population fully vaccinated?
Well, as you know, China is actually behind in its vaccine schedule, and of course they report lower rates of disease, but it is concerning that they have not vaccinated most of the population. Of course, those meeting for the party gathering this week have all been vaccinated as a condition of being at the meeting and were offered the vaccines. Moving ahead. The fact is some of the Chinese vaccines have the advantage that they can be stored in normal refrigerators, don't need extra cold temperatures, and that's a good thing. But as they work with the attenuated or killed virus, which is different from the messenger RNA approach that has been taken by Pfizer and Moderna, at the same time, because they work with a killed virus, they're also much more inexpensive, and that gives the opportunity to roll them out more broadly. I can't comment on what's going on inside China, of course, because I'm not there, but it does, from reports that I've seen, it looks like there is a much more slow rollout than had been anticipated.
Now, China did start using some of these vaccines domestically over the summer. You say that they're not mRNA, which would make them more in line with the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, the traditional, if you will, vaccines. How does what we've seen in China compare to what we're seeing across Europe and across the U.S. and the rest of the West?
Well, allow me to clarify. Actually, the traditional vaccines, if there is such a thing, is one that China has developed for the most part, which is a killed virus, which is then injected into the human and then allows the body to make its own immunological response to it, so that when and if it's exposed to the virus later on, it recognizes the viral particle, forms an antibody to the antigen, and forms a good immunological response. The vaccines of Pfizer and Moderna are not traditional. They have never been done before. It is messenger RNA, which was developed by a Turkish researcher working with Pfizer, and it's revolutionary. And with anything that's revolutionary in medicine, we have to wait and see what's going to happen. So for all of these vaccines, whether the traditional killed virus or the one with the microRNA, there are a lot of side effects that we expect, and whether or not they will prove to be more serious, we don't know. As you may be aware, the trials in Brazil originally showed that the Sinopharm vaccine was almost 90% effective, and then more recent data indicated that it was just slightly over 50% effective. However, effective at blocking more serious disease, which is the much more concerning issue, because mild cases of the coronavirus can be recovered from, but serious cases are the things that have shut down intensive care units around the world and in Wuhan for a while.
There really naturally is a global demand for vaccinations that is urgent, as epidemiologists like yourself would stress that the world needs to be vaccinated in order for the world to be safe. China appears to be answering that call. What is it doing in terms of, if you will, vaccine diplomacy? Where are these vaccines going? How are these nations being chosen? And what is the effectiveness of that from an epidemiological perspective?
Well, you know, this is a very challenging question. Vaccine diplomacy is unfortunately quite political, not surprisingly. So China has sent 400,000 doses to Afghanistan. But Singapore will not take some of the Chinese vaccines now because they're not satisfied with the efficacy data. So in all of this, I think what is needed, what is lacking, is a global approach. And although the World Health Organization on paper looks like it will be the global leader, there has been a failure of countries to work with the WHO to allow the WHO to play the leadership role that it could play. And so as a consequence, countries are off on their own, and it's a bit of the Wild West. And some of the wealthier countries are paying bounties to get more vaccines because they can afford to do that. The real tragedy is that the poorer countries have very little access to vaccines. And that's where it's going to be important for the WHO to identify those countries that need more of the vaccine. At the same time, there's an interesting development in research. There's something called the Neanderthal gene, which has been identified as increasing the chance that you'll get more severe disease. And it appears that Chinese and Indians may have less of this gene, and therefore there may be less severe disease than they would otherwise have. This is an example of the sort of research that must be done on a global scale, and where the absence of coordination is really a very big problem for all of us, because vaccines and viruses really don't know anything about national boundaries.
Is, of course, to remember that most of this pandemic happened under Donald Trump's watch, and his administration did refuse to participate in COVAX and other global efforts, but we'll leave that for another time. Dr. Devra Davis, thank you so much for your insight.
You're very welcome. Thank you.